Welcome to the Pushing Limits podcast, where we explore the people, places, and products that are pushing the limits. I'm your host, Rich Vargas. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Pushing Limits podcast. I'm here today with Tony Berkowitz. We're here in beautiful East Cape, Baja California, and we're here currently for the Bisbee's East Cape tournament. And I'm sitting here right now with one of the champs, 2012 Bisbee's champion, black and blue. And welcome to the show, Tony.
Thanks, Rich.
Yeah, man.
You know, I kind of feel like we should be out there fishing right now.
Yeah, we should.
Part of me wants to just go get on the boat. But we're here. We'll talk some story.
Yeah, man. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
It's been a long run. Born and raised in Texas, San Antonio, South Texas. Always gravitated towards outdoor sports. Always hunted and fished. My parents had a secondary home in Port Aransas, Texas. It's a little island down south, and there's great bay fishing there. And back in the day, there's good offshore fishing there now, but back in the day, the boats that we had to make it out 40, 50 miles to the rigs where really the fish were, that was a pretty big trip in some of those boats from the 70s. But ended up going into business out of college, went to the University of Texas. And my family had an intro to high fashion stores, and they had invested in them. And I had an easy job path. So I followed it and ended up working in merchandise, mostly brands, designer labels. I managed Gucci for the state of Texas. Eventually, my stores had leases with different designer groups out of Italy and out of Europe. So I worked that side of the street, went to international markets all over the world, China, Europe, and learned a lot. Had a lot of talented people that worked around me as buyers. I crunched all the numbers as a merchandiser, and we made a lot of money and expanded the store groups that I was in from 3 to 13 in the 10 years that I worked out of school.
Wow.
Working in merchandise and getting some travel experience, learning how to manage supply line, get the goods into our stores from market. It was quite a learning curve. And of course, China was the thing. It had just been opened up when I started to get into merchandise heavily. So we started to make Chinese buying trips, and that was a whole other element to learn.
So you go out to China for merchandise?
We'd go to China for merchandise. We'd have buying offices back then, the big taipans. Ours was called Swire and McLean. They were a super old British house. But they did the job for you in a big way. They'd go out to every manufacturer in your category and bring the merchandise into their offices for shopping purposes. So you had mini buyers going out through all the Chinese markets, bringing you stuff back for your selection, for your store groups. Eventually got traded to a New York buying office from my group that was a member of the buying office in New York and did buys for 13 different store groups that represented over 100 stores. All in different states, but all in better fashion merchandise and brands. So that was kind of a fun thing. I was fishing every weekend. I was making enough money to buy a boat and keep it in the water. And I'd try and finish work early and get home so I could get offshore. And then a break happened. A lot of people didn't consider it a break, but I did. We got in a hostile real estate takeover with the retail companies I was working for, and they lost. And 3,800 people lost their jobs in 1984 or late 83. And I was one of them. And I was secretly happy, you know? It was just like, man, I could do this and the money's great and the work's engaging, but it's not my passion.
All right.
So as soon as I got word that the stores were in this takeover and that they were going to lose, I went into the president of the company, who was a friend at the time, and I said, hey, what's the best severance deal? And he said, you're an exec VP in the company. Don't tell the new guys, but go. You got a year. So he gave me a year on salary to replace myself, which I promptly, at first, I went down to a friend of mine that owned a tackle store, and he was complaining because he never made any money, but he loved what he was doing because he was such a passionate fisherman. And I said, you're missing clothing, okay? It's where the markups are much better than hooks and sinkers. You got to get into this business. So I got him an Orvis franchise. I brought him into Patagonia, Columbia, and some of the associated outdoor wear brands. And his business started to fly. Did all of that in under a year, and we opened a new store with him out in the suburbs. He was really happy. Then I got a call from a man from Houston that I knew that I'd fished with. And he said, hey, I heard your store group's going out and that all of y'all are losing your jobs. And I said, yes. And he said, well, I've got 2 villas in Cabo and 2 yachts, and I'm setting up an oil and gas hospitality operation. You're my guy. I want you to go down there. I know you love that place. I've been coming to Cabo for a few years since high school, whenever I could get down and fish. And he said, look, I'll give you a 2-year contract. And I said, well, Billy, that's cool. What would I be making? And he said, well, what were you making as a retailer? And I told him, and he said, well, I can't pay you that. Come on. And I said, all right, we made a deal. And I came down, and Santa Maria Bay is a very special place just outside of Cabo. Back then, it had 4 homes on it, owned by Bud Parr, who was the owner of the Hotel Cabo San Lucas, who I became associated with during this time through the oil and gas man that set up the houses. And we operated those happily for a couple of years. People coming in probably had 30 groups a year for a week or so, and just would pull the boats up in the bay and pick people up and take them offshore and drop them back off on the beach. And just the kind of wonderful, experience you would want in a Mexican resort like Baja. And those were the days when town didn't have much. There weren't big resorts. There weren't rolled-up resorts everywhere. There were only 3 or 4.
It was still a true little Baja.
It was a sleepy fishing village, and it was just the way I liked it. Sure, you had your inconveniences because you didn't get a lot of American products. And right. Sometimes you're sketchy in the grocery department. But everybody had an abundance of fresh fish. In those days, the charter boats would come in, and they'd all come into public dock. It was one location. Women that were either widows or older or just didn't have fish would walk down to the dock with their own bag and yell at the guys as they came in, can you give me something? Every day these women would walk away with pounds of nice fresh fish in their bags.
Oh, wow.
Everybody on the charter boats, it was a normal deal here. They just give
it back to the community.
We had excess.
Yeah.
We had excess. I'll never forget that in the early charter days when the fleet was 40 boats and there was no marina, we were all tied up and took leaky inflatables out to our boats in the morning, tied them to a buoy and brought them back in. 40 boats would catch or release over 100 marlin almost every day.
Really?
Yes, and this was before the boats would range out to further spots, Golden Gate, Punta Gorda, outside spots. This was all local fishing between El Faro and basically...
And so back then, had sport fishers really entered Cabo yet, or was it all the old school pongas?
It was sport fishers coming in a little at a time, but most of them were either used brands from the States. Older Bertrams were always going to be in play. They owned part of the charter market. But you had builders like Arca out of La Paz producing 28-foot glass over wood single diesel cruisers for this charter market. And these were super simple, uncomplicated boats. Nothing great or performance oriented about them, but they were hard built and they'd get out. They'd burn minimal fuel with one engine and they'd get back in safely.
That's all you need.
And that's all they needed to do to catch that fish and bring them back in. I was working pretty good, and I was working out of the charter fleets at the Hacienda Hotel. I was their fleet master for a while. And I met I met first Hank Deviney from Texas, and he brought down a boat, hull number 14, Cabo 35. It was, I think, 1991. And he had a guy that knew of me, Howard Horton, who was a captain out of Galveston. He knew I was down there. We didn't know each other well. But they looked me up, And Hank said, how'd you like to run this? And I said, well, I have a charter company. He said, I'm not coming every day. So we made a deal for part-time, and I captained that Cabo. And as I started to run it and dig around in the bilge and maintain it, and I got it with low hours in perfect condition, new boat. And you don't want to be the guy to have an owner come and say, hey man, what'd you do to my boat?
Right.
It's a serious responsibility. This is somebody's pride and joy. And I started to realize, hey, this boat's built a little bit differently. I'm not busting knuckles and scratching the hell out of myself when I try and get to a maintenance item that's simple, like an oil filter or something else. And look at these wiring runs. They're all coded and they're colored. I can see where the trace is going. And look, I can get both hands on this component, to work it. And I realized that their systems integration was well thought out.
Right.
So I started to talk to Hank about it. He said, oh, you're going to meet the factory guys. They're coming down. So I met Mike Howarth and Stan Broadfoot. He was shop foreman back then at the old plant. They were working out of Costa Mesa. They're in OC. And I started to take an interest because I thought, these guys are going to be something.
Yeah.
And I started to think that these Cabo boats would start to replace Bertrams under 50 feet, as they brought in models, because it was pretty much a better idea.
Right.
Even though there were no cost savings involved. They were real reasonable coming out. You could buy from almost any dealer a 35 Cabo for $300,000 in change.
Really?
When the line first came out. And it was the previous hull. It was the Crelock hull before they went to the Lou Cadega hull, I think about 2000. But they were still excellent boats. The early hulls had one little flaw, which was the Crelock hull had pretty significant propeller pockets. And it did hamper your reverse maneuverability and your reverse performance. But other than that, they were great boats. The laminations were great. The fit and finishes and gel coats were super excellent. And things were put together solidly, mechanically fastened and Sikaflex chemically joined hull and cap, really good construction methods. So I stuck with the line and eventually did some testimonial ads for Cabo as a captain and sold some boats. Had a Cabo dealership through Pecani with Phil. And then from there, I went on my own office across the marina and started to sell all brands. Had out-of-country rights for Viking for a short period. Really saw them starting to come up in the 90s too. The Viking boats weren't as good and weren't as well constructed, and the whole machine wasn't really on its up to perfection until mid-90s. That's when they really had a break.
For Viking.
Yes. I don't know whether it was Tom Wilson or whoever the designers were there, that the construction methodology was good. And Cabo and Viking were on a similar path, where at the plant you'd have the construction materials clearly sorted. The boat would go down the line. It would receive components at stages. And it was a logical way to build a boat without a bunch of muss and fuss and without making mistakes.
Right.
And Viking and Cabo had very similar plant setups, Viking being much bigger. But started to take an interest in more than just the fishing, started to enjoy the platforms and the boats and realize the relationship between the two. That as a charter captain, the limitations were usually only, the boat.
Right.
That was usually the limitation.
Yeah, you control what you can control.
Exactly.
And
when the mind got freed up to absolutely not worry about any noise or any condition the boat had on it, when you just knew you were absolutely going to have a trouble-free day,
right.
It really did allow you to create a little bit more with your fish finding ability.
Right.
It allowed you to function. And then, of course, all of the different inventions that came up through the line. When I first got to Cabo, there was no GPS.
Yeah.
And chart map was forget about it. We didn't even have Loran. Loran didn't make it transmissions down to Cabo.
And so this was mid-'80s?
Mid-'80s until into early 90s. I think I got my first numbers for Uno GPS machine in like 89 or 90.
Oh, wow.
And it was like giving a blind man an eye. Here's one, and then when I got a chart map, here's two. You get both eyes then. But I'll never forget, a bunch of Mexican skippers came over and we were punching in machines and we were looking at charts and we were doing numbers machines. And they just looked at me and went, "This is unbelievable." And I went, "It's magic, isn't it? This thing is magic." And I said, "Pretty soon, we're going to have it on a map. And we're going to be able to zoom." And they're like, "No way." And when we did get the first little chart plotters, I remember getting one and having Mexican captains come over and go, "Look, boom, Spanish translation. Go crazy." They're just rolling the old roller ball. They're rolling the ball around everywhere before we had touchscreen, rolling the trackball. But it was an eye-opener because it took me forever for them to teach me how to navigate biangular on land. We only had two spots. You line up El Faro Mountain with the other mountain here, and you check your it's all such a crapshoot, but they really were so naturally talented.
Yeah.
To go 20 miles offshore and put you on a football field size structure that rose up several hundred feet off the bottom.
It's old school.
And really, you'd go out there and there'd be pongus fishing bait when you got there, with nothing, just for the handle. And you'd pull up and go, "Yeah, he's parked directly above the high spot." And it never failed. They were always right. But I owe a lot to the local Cabo captains and the fishing culture there. I got there at a time, I think, before there was resentment of any kind towards Americans.
Yeah.
And I think I got there at a time when my attitude, having been raised in a majority Mexican atmosphere growing up, my town was 80% Hispanic. I didn't have a sense of being different from anybody in Mexico because the Texas I grew up in was so Mexican.
Right.
And I was so lucky to be accepted. I don't know whether it was because they sensed that I like Mexicans and I'm from their culture, or whether they just thought that I was crazy and thought I was fun to watch. But I made a lot of friends in the fleet, and it was easy back then to fish with different people. And there was always a value and a benefit. The payoff was you learned a trick from these guys every time you went out.
Yeah.
And the old school thing was nobody paid mates salaries or to stay-ons on charter boats. Captains only got a minimum salary and they lived off tips. And when you wanted a deckhand in the morning, you picked them off from a work lineup when you got your people on board. You'd pull up, the mates would be in a line, and you'd take whoever was standing on the point. And you'd get to fish with 30 or 40 different deckhands a year easily. You had your favorites after a while, and they'd jump ahead and go, "I'll take Raul," or whatever. But you got to fish with so many different people, and each one of them had their own little spin. I'll never forget, Manuel Castro once taught me a trick. There were 4 or 5 striped marlin tailing down swell slow. It was tailor time. This is when they come up to the surface, warm their body temperature, and slow hunt bait. But a lot of tailors aren't aggressive on feeding. They're in kind of a slow slumber type period. But when you have multiples, they're sticking up like a fence post. You don't want to waste time trying to bait a dud fish. You can throw at them 30 times and make great casts. And they see the bait. They're just not stimulated to eat it at that time. But I'll never forget, after doing that and making about 10 casts at different pods with 2 to 3 to 4 fish in them, finally we pulled up on 4, and Manuel Castro goes, "Wait," before he runs to the bow. And he takes a free bait out of the bait bow, and he thumps it once to just lightly stun it on the covering board. And he throws it out in front of 4. And it sits there on top, and one of the 4 lights up, stars and bars, and goes over and jams it. And he goes, "That's the one." He pins on another one, goes up to the bow, and concentrates on that fish until he hooked it.
Really?
That was the one that wanted to eat. It was the only one that moved. All four of these fish saw it hit the water. It was obvious. And one just lights up and goes.
He was a hungry one.
Yeah, it's fun. But anyway, Mexicans taught me plenty about fishing, especially in this area. They've got a million tricks.
This episode is brought to you by Pelagic Gear, built for life on the water. Pelagic delivers gear trusted by pros and worn by those who live the ocean lifestyle. Check them out at pelagicgear.com. That's awesome, man. So you've been around, Cabo, now going on almost 40 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you've seen the progression of not only, the fishery, the types of boats that are out here and the expansion of the actual city itself. Now it's a major tourist destination, huge resorts, all that. What's your thoughts about, the fishery and the future here?
One of the most important things that happened with the growth was the understanding about conservation. And yes, in the early days, in our naivete, in our ignorance, we thought they would just keep coming up forever. We killed plenty. If a man wanted a picture with a fish, it was dead and in the boat. That's the 80s in Cabo.
Right.
And there wasn't discussion about where we were headed with it or, what it was going to lead to, the depletion or anything else. We just were so single-minded. We just thought, oh, this is God's gift. This is a mountain of fish that's going to erupt here forever. All right. We were stupid about it until the guy that really had the most impact was Don Tyson. When Tyson's Pride came down, he was a Billfish Foundation founder. He was an IGFA board member. And Rick DeFeo, Tony DeJulian, those guys were crewing for him. I got to meet him and I got to crew for those guys a little bit. And I got to meet Don Tyson. And he had a talk with me one day. And I didn't realize what it was when we were talking about it after fishing. He said, Tony, you got a big responsibility. And I said, what, Don? He said, you got to start letting all these stripers go. All of these fish got to go. These fish are too important. Y'all got to keep them around here and enjoy them forever. And all of these kids that you and these captains are having, they're going to have these marlin around and make a living. We've got to do something. What do you think we should do? Why are they killing them? And I said, well, if a tourist wants a picture, they'll kill it. And they also try and sell mounts off of it. It was Gray's Taxidermy and others working in the market.
Right.
And he said, well, there's no fish in those mounts. Don't they know that? We can measure that. And he said, what else? And I said, well, if they strip it down and take it around, sell it, smokehouse and they probably get $40. He said, $40? That's it? And I said, yeah. And he said, tell you what, tell all of them, if they'll take a picture of them releasing a fish. Now, this is old camera days still. They'll just take a picture of them releasing a fish, I'll give them $40. I said, really? So I told a few guys. And they went over there and started getting their $40. And then he came over and he had a sticker. It said, release me. And that was the name of his boat, his Hatteras that he left in Cabo.
Really?
First. And he did it in Spanish, suéltame, with a striper on it. And he gave me thousands, and he gave other guys that got around thousands. And we stickered the town and everybody's truck. It's a very popular sticker to have. And the culture of catch and release really started in earnest with the efforts of Don Tyson.
Really?
And little guys like me, guys that were pushing.
That's awesome.
That understood. And, you have to understand the industrial scale that Cabo represents in the big game charter industry. There's no place like it. I've been around the world. And no place maintains 150 to 200 rank and file charter boats that go out every day if they can.
Right.
And nobody has the number of billfish catches or other game fish catches that this fleet provides.
So you'd say mid-90s is when that kind of transition really started?
It did. It did. And Don's efforts are still not forgotten. We are not as absolute in our commitment to conservationism as some countries are, like Costa.
Yeah. I mean, Costa Rica,
you just don't kill one there.
No, it's next level. If you kill a
It's a
billfish,
crime. So we have to continue and find a happy medium. But realize this, this is the home of the old school big fish kill tournament.
Right.
And that started a long time ago. The excitement that it's provided to the town and my life and everybody else that's been involved in it, going to be very hard to replace.
Right.
But we're working on it. All the big kill tournaments have important and highly invested release divisions now, and I think that'll continue to expand.
It's a matter of finding that balance, right? Because you do go to a place like Costa Rica where it's like, this year I fished the Pelagic Rockstar, and we had 40, sailfish releases in a day. Yeah. Where it's like, it's incredible, and you don't get that in a lot of places. And I think Costa Rica has that because of the laws that are implemented in the culture. It's not even just the law, but even the locals, you don't see locals going out there trying to skirt the law and, kill their billfish either. So they understand that, that resource is going to provide for them for years and years and years to come.
And you're talking about the sport fishing operatives there that understand, but it's a two-faced situation there. You have to understand.
Right.
They permit coastal longlining in Costa Rica.
Yep.
We do not here in Cabo.
Right.
Baja has some legality that permits it, but there's kind of some local opposition to that.
Right.
I've been out to take authorities to board illegal commercial longline operations here in Cabo successfully and busted them, confiscated boats. I did that once with Marco Ehrenberg on our Pisces fleet.
Yeah.
When I was at Pecani. When I founded Pecani with Phil, we had some captains call in and said, hey, there's a longliner working out at Punta Gorda. And that was just our place. There's a lot of places we could see you, but don't put one there. You're going to get a lot of them.
Is there any federal regulation or actual patrols and stuff that's trying to stop some of this illegal commercial fishing?
There are laws about areas and interdiction. Cabo is lucky because everybody in the commercial industry knows there's so many boats out there every day that they're going to be observed and they're going to be scrutinized.
Right.
And they don't want that. They want to go work where they can work.
Right.
Yeah. So we're not picked on particularly, but we know they're outside of our perimeter.
Right. And I know for us, I don't know, I'm pretty sure they're allowing it just south of San Diego. We're getting a ton of the big Chinese, Japanese purseaners that are coming and just deleting schools of bluefin tuna, and it's like you're 15, 20 miles south of U.S. waters and all these fish are coming up, they're wrapping these entire schools.
And
Control,
I think,
Alt, Delete.
The international nature of what happens with it now is well taken, a good point. Maybe Mexico and the U.S. and Canada should have their own North American fishing setup to try and combat this. Because if you go down and look off of Peru, look off of the South American coast, the Chinese fleets, they're there 24/7. They factory work it. They bring out the transship. They put all the product on it, maybe reload some supplies.
Right.
Very normally don't change out the guys too much. Leave the crew on board and keep fishing.
Yeah.
They'll stay there if the weather permits 300 days a year.
Yeah, and I would say it's funny because we get, as fishermen, we get scrutinized for kill tournaments for myself as a spear fisherman, right? If you go and shoot a billfish or something like that, but then you fail to realize that the amount of fish and bycatch and everything that these commercials and illegal commercials, longliners, purseaners, drift nets, all that kind of stuff are taking, are more than I could ever take personally in a lifetime.
I'm not going to go completely to the other way and say we are 0% of the problem, okay?
Right.
But we're maybe 1% and that's it.
Exactly.
Okay?
Exactly.
And in that sense, yes, the hypocrisy of commercial fishing and the bycatch numbers versus the quotas and the bycatch numbers for recreational just don't make sense when they're stacked up. It's not an issue.
Right.
But remember, fish is food. People have to eat. And it's unfortunate, but the way things stacked up, Asian and other countries' diets are 70 and 80% things that come from the sea, while the American diet's normally reversed, 30% or so things that come from the sea. That's changing as the cost of beef gets totally accelerated, and the realization that it may not be the best protein. Maybe fish is the best protein.
Right.
And I think you'll see fish prices will continue to go up too. But it's an amazing thing that can feed the entire planet if properly managed. And that should be the spirit in which we do this commercial regulation, recreational regulation.
Yeah, I think it's just about finding the balance, right? Because I mean, we're here at the Bisbees, right? We obviously support these tournaments. It's a way of life. It's a culture, and we love it. It's what we do. But that's why us personally here at Pacific Icon, we started our nonprofit, which is our Ocean Conservation Icon Blue, and our key is our catchphrase is protect the playground. Right?
Great.
Because, now you started doing this, 50, 60 years ago, and now I'm the next generation coming in. Like, how do we protect this so that, my kids, my grandchildren can continue to enjoy the things that we love?
And it's also good business. When I met Ron Quadja in 2000, came aboard as a charter client, and he wanted to get into the business. And we were talking about release and conservation and how it applied to businesses. You always wanted to get identified with that release and that conservation movement.
Right.
It was better for you, better for your image. Hence Pecani, we left in there, there's a big sign on the door. We don't kill marlin here.
Right.
They're telling the customer up front what their position is.
Yeah. You want to kill one, you better go somewhere else because it ain't here.
That's a pretty radical statement when I, got out of Pecani there in the 90s. That was a pretty radical step. You're drawing a line in the sand for people. Could cost you some business, but it didn't. It turned out on the right side of it. Ron and I had a Respect the Ocean conservation program inside Pelagic after we'd been in it a few years. And we did a bunch of merchandise based on Respect the Ocean tags and stuff and gave to different people. I was a member of the RFA, Recreational Fishing Alliance, that Jimmy and the guys started. It was funded basically out of Viking in the 90s. So I had some consultory control. And I've got friends now that are on national boards. Stephen Whiteson, Montauk, we call him, is a good friend. He's a consultant now for national marine fisheries and government programs. And he's a recreational only angler and very passionate about it. So we have a voice. But, let's not get thrown out with the bathwater of commercial fishing regulation. We're a separate issue, okay? And our impact is a separate issue. The funding and the resources that we give back to conservation and fisheries is another issue, Commercial fishing's hard put, things are not easy out there. But remember, we're using industrial methods now that were never envisioned by man. Pair trawling, midwater trawling, factory ships. Yes, we can take out of the resource beyond some area's ability to replenish. Now, knowing that, you've got a big responsibility.
Yeah, absolutely.
You just can't do things.
Now, getting back to the boats, man. So back in the day when you first got out here, you were running, some of the old boats, glass over wood, and you've seen the evolution from the Cabos to the Vikings, and now to these center consoles and super center consoles. What's your thoughts on, these boats and how they perform here in Cabo? And
it's just the most amazing evolution. When I arrived in Cabo, late 80s, early 90s, Pisces fleet was established. They had some 31 Bertrams. They also had some old 28 Uniflights. Finisterre Tortuga fleet was kind of the locals only. They were using all La Paz built glass over wood single diesels. And Tortuga, that's turtle. We call them that because they were slow. They were 18 knots flat out, but they're not going far, and they're catching sensational catches, lots of fish. Then when Hank DeVinny brought hull number 14 Cabo 35 down, 91, I'm looking around and I'm thinking, wow, this is pretty superior. And I'd only had one superior boat before that, which was a 34 Phoenix SFX that a man named Joel Newman from Rancho Santa Fe brought down. And I ran that for him for a couple of years. And it was the one that had the first numbers machine GPS, first tower boat I'd ever ridden. And I felt like I'd been given a lightsaber. I mean, it was just that good. You could see forever. It would run. It was fast. It had a big cockpit. But if you were in the fleets then, a 31 Berkman was a premium charter boat, no matter how beat, all right? Because you knew it had enough cockpit space. It would make it back in rough seas. It had a deep V hull. It's going to be wet, but you're getting home. Captains loved it because you're right on top of the fish. See all the way around the boat. Then I got that first Cabo 35 and started to realize, oh my God, now I've got a phaser. This thing is good. And the numbers started to show it. The boats weren't breaking down. They were reasonable on fuel. And Phil Gentile, who founded Pecani with me, looked at me and said, yeah, but can we charge $1,000 a day for them? And I went, bingo, we're going to find out. And we were the first guys to get 4 figures on a day boat charter in Cabo San Lucas. Pecani was. Nobody had a $1,000 boat. We did. And I think that was kind of a threshold breaker back then, because people used to go down there and the whole deal was how much? Right. How much? All right. And then we started to ask the question, how good? How good? What is the boat we're going on? What is the crew we're going with? We changed the emphasis from price to quality of platform, quality of service on board.
Right.
And look at Pecani. It's one of the longest running fleets now in Cabo.
Right.
It's been there forever, and they're still providing the highest quality service and catches. It's a sleeper. But it was all by design. When Phil and I started, I would warn the guys. I would say, hey, anybody no-shows on a hangover or anything else? You better be hit by a car and call me the night before if you can. Because I'm taking your boat out with your party, and I'm going to get a bigger tip than you got. All right? And by the way, the second time you call me and you weren't hit by a car but can't make it for a charter, you're fired. Don't even call in. That's it.
Right.
It's a charter business. You show up.
Quality is everything.
You take your ride. All right, be on point. But just the threat of having me take their boat out and run it all day and make a tip on it was enough going to make them say, and if they were smart, they'd call me a day in advance and say, I'm having minor surgery Thursday, and I know I've got a charter. Will you take it? All right. By the way, watch that right engine. It's been heating up all morning. Whatever it is.
Right.
But, yeah. And that puts you in a real position, too, to rule the fleet you're on, because you're ending up on each boat for a day, and you're beginning to see maybe any maintenance item that was overlooked by the guy that was running it, because when you run them every day, sometimes you get blind to the little things.
Well, it's obvious that Picante has the quality because, not only is it one of the longest standing, but it's known worldwide by reputation on the quality it delivers. And I think that, it really goes to show the thought and the effort that goes into it from, the lunches that are provided, the tackle, the crew.
It's in-house stuff, lunches
everything.
On down. Look, on captains, take a look at Picani's record from the mid-90s into 2005. Every captain wanted to get on one of those boats then, because that was going to be the easiest elevation onto a good boat for them,
right.
Probably. Finding a private owner, bringing down the yacht was still kind of more of a process.
Right.
And as those guys got on better equipment and had that confidence, you see that string of Pecani wins in tournaments, in
almost 5 million in winnings over the years, right?
A ton of wins and a ton
and I think
of
Phil still has the biggest to date blue or black Marlin.
993 blue Marlin in a Bisbee when we were together, and he looked at me and he said, what are you going to do? And I said, okay, I'm going to take the 35, and I had a charter party. And he said, I'm taking my cousin Rocky, Bob, and Carlos and Pancho. And I said, okay, and that was on the 40 Tolly. He had the Tolly that we inherited when we started the fleet. And I said, the fish are up here. Good luck, man. And I thought, I'm telling them I'm going to go win this thing, man. Forget that. Good luck to you. Fuck it. I'm going to go win it. Anyway, I get a radio call at 10 in the morning the first day, and I can see them in my binocs. They're north of me and upside. I talked to Pancho and them, and they decided we were going to go fish up inside Golden Gate in the slop pit up there. Above McGreen, there's a big deep trench that runs parallel with the shore. And there's bait and stuff hangs on it. And they get a lure bite on a black and green cut head that was provided in the angler's bag. They rigged it up and put a big hook in it because they like to look at him, and it was out on the rigger. And bang, okay? And Panchon and Carlos liked a free swinger rig with two 12-aught stainless J hooks, 180 degree, swinging on heavy mono, 4 or 500 Snell to mono, a double rig, but one here, okay? And it was a free swinger. It was loose. When the fish bit, he got one here and one looped over the top of his bill and back down to the point of his chin.
Oh, so he was in it.
He got mouse trapped. He was absolutely cinched shut by the double rig. So after a couple of runs, he just laid on top, suffocating, and died as they backed the boat down.
Oh my God.
They put a straight gaff in his lip and tried to start dragging it aboard. Anyway, Phil calls me on the channel and goes, well, we got one here. It's really big, man. And I said, go to the other channel. So we were on a secret channel. I'm sure guys are scanning this. I went, Phil, go give me a measurement. All right. And he goes, okay, it's 15 feet. Not inches. And I went, you can stop fishing. The scale will set up, but I just go put a towel on that one and sit at the dock. You don't want anything to happen. You just won the tournament in the first out.
Holy shit.
And he said, are you kidding me? I said, I'll see you when I get in. I'm going to go try and beat it. But 15 foot, nobody's ever caught one this big, Phil. All right, so go in and start drinking. Don't say anything to anybody else. Don't tell them where you were. And I got in, and Phil and I had an office. It was a little further down from the office we have now. It was in the corner near A-Dock. And Phil had a hotel room up above that at the Marina Fiesta. And after he got his weigh sheet at 993.5 pounds, I just went, you are really crushing the crowd. You've crushed their little minds. Now guys are going to go out and fish dead for 2 days and know it, okay? Because this is easily the biggest tournament fish that's been in Cabo. It's one of the biggest fish that's ever been documented here. And you got it. And it had already spawned out. It was skinny near the tail. It didn't have huge amounts of roe or fat or anything else.
Yeah.
It could have been a grander reel either. Anyway, 993 pounds. And
Well, awesome, man. Well, it was a pleasure, man. We really appreciate your time, and thanks for coming on the show. Thanks, guys, for tuning in. If you guys want to check out, some of Tony's information, check out Bacante Sport Fishing. He's still located down here in Cabo, and thanks for listening.